All right, let's talk about why some people are so resistant to AI. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's probably not for the reasons you think. You know who I'm talking about, right? That writer who visibly cringes when you mention ChatGPT, or the designer who refuses to even touch generative tools. You see them everywhere, and we all kind of make the same snap judgment about them. Yeah, the usual take is, oh, they're just behind the times, or they're just scared. We assume they don't get it yet, and that, eventually they'll come around. But what if that whole story is just wrong? Because it turns out this isn't just about being afraid of losing your job or not understanding the tech. The reality is way, way more complex. And honestly, it tells us something pretty profound about what it means to be human. So, on one hand, we have the simple story: fear of job loss, not getting the tech. But on the other hand, we have the psychological reality, which is all about things like identity, mastery, and even morality. These are the real drivers, and we're going to break down each one. Okay, so first up, let's get into the stuff that's really personal. We're talking about protecting the self. Because for a lot of people, saying no to AI isn't really about the technology at all. It's an act of self-preservation. And here's the absolute key to understanding this. For so many professionals, their work isn't just what they do, it's who they are. A writer doesn't just put words on a page. Their voice, their style, that's their identity. So when AI comes along, it's not just threatening their job, it's threatening their very sense of self. And that threat feels intense. I mean, get this. Brain scans show that threats to our identity light up the same areas as physical pain. It literally hurts. So when you hear someone say, I'm a real artist, I don't use AI, it's easy to dismiss that as being pretentious. But it's not. It's a defense mechanism. It's self-preservation. That deep sense of identity is often built on years of hard work, of struggle even. And that brings us perfectly to our second reason, the effort justification trap. It's this deep-seated psychological bias we all have. We just place a higher value on things that we had to work really hard to get. And this is where AI creates a huge psychological conflict, right? Imagine you've spent years, decades even, honing your craft. You've put in your 10,000 hours. And then this tool comes along and can get a similar result in like 10 seconds. To embrace that tool means you have to face this really uncomfortable idea. Maybe all those years of struggle weren't entirely necessary. And for a lot of people, it is just psychologically easier to reject the tool than question their entire life's work. Okay, this next one is fascinating. It's a concept from anthropology called moral contamination. And the idea is pretty simple. If you come into contact with something you believe is unethical or impure, you can start to feel tainted by it. And believe it or not, for a lot of people, AI feels, well, morally contaminated. Why, you ask? Well, think about where it comes from. It's often trained on vast amounts of data that were scraped without anyone's consent. It takes a ton of energy, which has a real environmental impact. And of course, it plays a role in job displacement. So for some people, using AI isn't just a technical decision. It feels like a moral compromise. So we've talked about protecting the self. Now let's zoom out a bit and talk about defending the craft. This is where how you do the work matters just as much, if not more, than the final result. Let's be honest, we live in an era that is obsessed with authenticity. And there's this really cool idea called self-perception theory, which basically says we learn who we are by observing our own actions. So if you see yourself taking a shortcut with AI all the time, how does that change how you see yourself? And that really gets to the heart of the authenticity impulse. AI, by its very nature, can feel derivative, almost algorithmic. And here's the thing, even if nobody else in the world knows you used it, you know. And for someone who prides themselves on genuine authorship, that feeling can be unbearable. So they choose to do it the hard way, to preserve that feeling of creating something that is truly their own. All right, next up is a huge one, loss of mastery. Feeling skilled and effective at something, that's a fundamental human need. Psychologists call it competence, and it's a deep, deep source of satisfaction. But AI comes in and just completely disrupts that feeling. Here's how. AI kind of flattens the skills curve. It commodifies expertise. All those years you spent building up your skills, they don't disappear, but your advantage shrinks. Suddenly, anyone with a good prompt is good enough. So what happens? Well, some people just retreat. They find spaces where their mastery still has value, instead of trying to compete in a world where everyone's an instant expert. And that brings us to our final point, and this one is maybe the most unsettling. It's about the fear of the unassisted mind. It's not just about our work today, but what happens to our brains tomorrow. Yeah, this is the classic slippery slope argument. But the thing is, there's real science behind it. It's called cognitive offloading. We've seen it before, right? Relying on GPS can literally weaken the part of your brain that handles navigation. So the fear is, what happens when you offload everything? First, AI helps with research. Then it drafts your emails. Then it writes your reports. And pretty soon, you're just clicking approve. The scary question becomes, have you forgotten how to think for yourself? So what's the takeaway here? It's that the people resisting AI aren't just Luddites. They're not just behind the times. They're actually protecting some really fundamental human things: identity, mastery, morality, authenticity. So the question isn't, are they right? The real question is, for all of us rushing to embrace these tools, what are we sacrificing by not even stopping to consider their concerns? And I'll leave you with this one last thought. It's a bit of a provocative one. In 10 years, the people who resisted AI, they might be the only ones left who still remember how to think without it. In a world that's outsourcing its own mind, maybe, just maybe, the unassisted brain will become the most valuable asset of all.